So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Debbie Stair. I am the Assistant Director for Leadership Development at MASB, which really means helping districts with all sorts of in-district work. So workshops for boards, strategic planning for the district, and any host of other requests that we might get. I'm also a resource for any board member around any governance issues. So feel free to reach out at any time. We're here to support you. And then with me today, I have Larissa and I have Cindy. They're going to monitor the chat. And we're going to ask that as we go along, you pop any of your questions in that chat function. And then at the end, we're going to save some time for your questions. And then if by some chance there's so many we can't get to them all, we will make sure that we provide some answers to you after the fact. Please know that you will be getting a link to this recording sometime probably next week, I believe Larissa said, as well as a copy of the PowerPoint that we're going to use, and probably a link to one of the documents that we reference in this as well. So by all means, take all the notes you want, but don't feel like you have to just try and write everything down or capture screenshots, because it's all going to be available to you after. All right, so I'm going to share my screen. So give me just a second here and let's make sure that I can do it. Even though we've been doing this for a couple of years, you know, sometimes takes a couple times. All right, so I'm assuming one of my colleagues will give me a thumbs up that you see the right thing. Okay, so here we go. Let me get to the first slide. You know, I will say that just to kind of start off, I was a board member myself for over 15 and a half years in my local district. I also served on the ISD board and served on MASB's board of directors. And, you know, one of the things I can honestly say as I look back now is that, you know, the work of being a board member was probably some of the most challenging work that I ever did. And yet at the very same time, it was by far my most rewarding work as well. And so for what that's worth, as you go into this work, thank you so much for being willing to take on this responsibility for your communities. It certainly is a commitment. For some of you, a 4-year commitment, for some of you 6. And, you know, hopefully it won't be your only commitment to the district. So one of the things we're going to talk about, and you're going to hear this phrase a lot. So as you attend other MASB events and trainings and classes, you're going to hear the term governance team. And so I just kind of want to set the record straight as we see it from MASB. Your governance team really is a team of 8. And you might be saying to yourself, oh, no, there's only 7 of us or 9 of us in some instances, very few. That's how many board members there are. And that's true. There are definitely a component of the governance team, a major component, but we also consider your superintendent to be a part of that governance team. And it's really that working together that really makes the difference. So interestingly enough, you know, school boards were created to serve as a liaison between the professional educators in the district and the community they serve to oversee the district. And I say that word very deliberately, oversee the district. It doesn't, you know, it's not about management. It's not about operations. It's about oversight. And the first school committee was actually appointed back in 1721. And by the early 1800s, legislation was in place that actually created school boards as we know them today. One of the many benefits of creating a team to oversee local school districts is the various perspectives that you see here on the slide it mentions, and the experience that board members bring to the table. And you know, it wouldn't make for good decision-making purposes if everyone at the table had the same backgrounds or the same skill sets or personalities. It's through those differences and through the dialogue that we get to really good solutions for the kids in our districts. But it really is about working together. And you'll notice that there's a second quote on this slide, and it's a Simon Sinek tweet. And many of you may know Simon Sinek's work. If you are not familiar with him, he has a lot of leadership, short YouTube videos on the topics of teams and other leadership topics. But he goes so far as to say it's not only a group of people that work together, but it's a group of people that trust each other. And I think it's really, it takes it to the next level to say that there has to be trust to do this work, especially because most of us who come to the work of a board member are not professional educators. So there has to be a lot of trust on board members' part to know that those who are in management and operations on a daily basis understand the work at a very deep level and are doing that work. And then for the superintendent to have trust in the board that they're going to fulfill their roles of oversight and governance, and be that sort of place where they can bounce ideas off of and have good dialogue and provide good feedback to the work that's being done in the district. And so that's really how I want you to think about this work as you go through this, that it's a give and take on both sides of the team. And so, it is important, though, to understand that although you're on the same team, you have very definite and distinct roles and responsibilities that are different than the superintendent's, but complement them. So let's take a little bit closer look at the concept of roles and responsibilities. So effective teams value and respect their essential roles, and they come to common understanding on those roles of the board and superintendent and strive to operate within them. This can really probably be one of the hardest concepts for board members to grasp. And I have to say, myself included, when I first started. We run on platforms, we talk about the things we want to fix, only to get elected and then get clarity about the fact that, gosh, we aren't in the work day to day. And that's very different in our personal lives, whether we work outside the home or inside the home these days in many situations, or even if your work is managing your home. We're all some sort of project manager and problem solvers. We're used to rolling up our sleeves and getting the work done. And that's not the work of governance and oversight. That's the work of management and operations. And so there's this sort of nebulous thing called oversight. And what does it really look like? And so what does that mean I do then? Am I there to rubber stamp? Absolutely not. And so we're going to talk about what those roles look like and the best practices that we know will really help make you the most effective board member that you can be. So imagine, although boards have been around since the 1700s, there's been absolutely no comprehensive research about their impact on student achievement until the early 2000s. Lots of research about teachers and principals and superintendents and their impact, but nothing about board members. And so our counterparts in the early 2000s in Iowa took it upon themselves to partner with their Superintendents Association, their State Department of Education, and the Iowa University to say, we need to study this topic. We need to really see what it means to have highly effective boards and high achieving students. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, what do not so effective boards look like who have not very high achieving students, and then imagine that spectrum and everything in between, and that's what they looked at. And so it was really a very comprehensive approach to the topic, and really came out with some great information for us to have as we go about this work. So let's take a little bit of a look at the findings from the research, and sort of distilled down into, I guess, what I would call more tangible terms. So what we know is that if boards spend their time mastering these 5 areas, they're going to have the greatest potential of positive impact on student achievement. So the first one is vision. And effective school boards establish a clear vision with high expectations for quality teaching and learning. Now, that doesn't mean that the 7 of you go off in a corner and establish the vision. It means you ensure that a process is put in place. And I would suggest that is highly inclusive of your staff and community. And that vision then is what everybody works on, moving the district in the same direction. The work looks a little different depending upon the hat you wear, but everybody's working towards the same thing. You can see the second one there is about accountability, and boards ensure that high academic standards and transparency and accountability towards those standards are all in place. You'll find that very often in strategic plans and in goal setting processes that districts use, making sure that all of those things are there. The third piece is around policy. It's through policy that school boards establish a set of guidelines that really sort of give the staff guideposts, if you will, or fence posts. Here are the rules that you have to operate within. And it also helps the staff transform the vision into reality through that work. Policy is a primary function of a board of education. And so it may seem tedious at times. You probably all have access to your policy manuals, whether they were in print, like mine was the first time, or available online. Most districts now post their policy manuals that way. But important for you to go through and see what kinds of guidelines have already been set up for the work of the district. The next piece is around community leadership. And school boards are really there to share their concerns and actions with the public through the established mechanisms that they might have in place for feedback, newsletters. Obviously, your meetings are a way of sharing information with the community, as well as any public policy or advocacy issues that you want your community to know about. You really are conduits and liaisons, if you want to think of it that way, between the community and the professional educators, right? So it's that movement of information and thought back and forth. Two-way communication is important. You're not only putting information out to the community from the district and ensuring that those processes are in place, but you're also gathering feedback around district operations and things that are going on. The last piece of the key works is it says relationships. And it's really about creating positive relationships at every level. But I really want to focus right now on the relationship between the superintendent and the board. And the fact that you need to really regularly take steps to work on that relationship. One of the things we know from the many years of research around superintendencies and student achievement is the longer a superintendent is in place, the greater likelihood of high levels of student achievement. And, so that means that we have to nurture that relationship with the superintendent and make sure that it's a positive one. I'm not saying that you're going to have to agree with everything your superintendent says. That's not ever going to happen. There will always be differences of opinions, but it's understanding how to maneuver those things and how to make sure that we're carrying out our roles and the superintendent's carrying out theirs so that, again, we complement the work of each other. But like all good relationships, it takes work. And it also doesn't happen overnight. So know that as a new board member, building that relationship will probably take some time, but it is certainly well worth your time, and allowing yourself to learn in the process from your colleagues about all 5 of these categories and from your superintendent as well. And then obviously they'll learn from you too. So it should be, learning is two-way as well. So if we look at the actual work and we really try to say, well, how does our work look different than that of administrators or even teachers? I think this chart is really a great chart. Now, it might look familiar for those of you who have already taken our foundational class, CBA 101, because I sort of stole it from there, because I just think it really helps to explain it so well. So you can see in the first column, and that very first item, it talks about school boards are at the strategic level. So we're looking at the big picture, or the 50,000-foot view. Think of yourselves up in a hot air balloon, if you will, sort of watching what's going on in the district. Again, not in the day-to-day operations. Your superintendent and other administrators are much more at the tactical level. So they're taking that strategic level work, breaking it down to work with others within the district. And so they see the big picture. They're a little closer to the ground though now. They're more of a 10,000-foot view. So they can see more pieces and parts, if you will. And then they're translating that to your instructional staff and others who are at the operational level, the ground level, those folks doing the work with students every day. And so, as you can see here, it calls it a more localized view. And it's really the impact that their work has on children each and every day. And this talks about teachers specifically, but that's really for anybody, whether we're talking about food service workers or transportation, all of those other folks that help to support the work of instruction. But you can see as you look at each one of these items, how it breaks it down for you a little bit more clearly, I think, about where your focus lies. The fourth item down really talks about where your priorities are and how far out into the future you look. So again, for boards, you're looking at that vision and making sure that a plan is in place to achieve the vision. And that's usually a vision that lasts 3 to 5 years. When we look at the superintendent and their administrative team, well, they're certainly working with that 5-year vision, but they're starting to break it apart, right? What do we need to get done in 1 or 2 or even 3 years as we break down that work and begin implementation of it? And then, of course, again, on the ground level, much smaller time periods, sometimes days, weeks, or maybe even months. Out into the future. Think of lesson plans. That's a good example of how their work is very different in the achievement of the vision. Okay, so here's a good example. Now, when you get the PowerPoint, you're going to see that there are slides about a lot of different topics. We won't have time today in our time together to cover all of the slides, but I want to give you an opportunity to spend a little time reviewing them later. They're all in very key areas that you will be involved in, the topics. And when you look at these, I want you really to be thinking about what kinds of verbs are being used here in the superintendent's role versus that of the board. So if you look at this particular one around vision, right, it talks here for the superintendent in words like supports, assists, advises in the upfront work, and then implements once it's been approved, right? And then on the board side, it talks about adopting it and then communicating it, making sure that that's shared with the community and the staff. One more topic, just to give you another sense, here's one around goal setting, obviously related to your vision. again, if we're looking at the verbs, we're seeing the same thing for the superintendent: assists and advise, implementation. Here it's adding, reports progress, not only to the board, but to the community, right? Because that's important. And then as we look at the board's role, you're ensuring that it's translated. You're making sure that the resources and systems are in place. And then finally holding the system accountable. Now you do that through the evaluation process of your superintendent. So again, just kind of looking at those differences, you're going to see different topics: policy, the educational program, better known as curriculum, employment, not only of your superintendent specifically on this one, but then of the rest of the staff. How does that look different? What is my role in that process? Budget, facilities, and then community relations. So lots of different topics, all areas that you need to understand. Again, really just sort of helping you to delineate those two responsibilities. Here's what a superintendent should be doing. Here's what a board should be doing. Again, understanding the difference between management and operations for the superintendent and oversight and governance for the board. So here's some common phrases that you might hear when we talk about the role of governance. And hopefully one of these will help you kind of remember your work a little bit better, to sort of help cement the thinking around what does governance look like for you. So the one I found really useful in my time as a board member is what versus how. Boards are the what we want our district to be, and superintendents are the how we're going to make it happen. So what versus how. On the bottom left, you see somebody there sort of down in the weeds. When you hear down in the weeds, that probably means that you're probably at a level of detail that might be something that you want to know, might be nice to know, but is it really necessary at your role, at your level, for decision-making purposes? The one in the middle there, eyes in, hands out. So again, I'm overseeing, I'm looking at the way things are happening, but I'm not in there managing the processes on a regular basis. The one on the upper right, boy, we've used this one for a long time. It might sound a little harsh, but staying in our lanes. The superintendent has a lane that they're in, the board has a lane that they're in, and the road system works best when we stay in our lanes. And then the one on the bottom right-hand corner is a reference to a joke. How many board members does it take to screw in a light bulb? The answer is none. You simply tell the superintendent that you would like the light bulb screwed in, right? And then that's, again, the work of those who manage and operate the system on a daily basis. So hopefully one of those things resonates with you, makes it feel a little bit more like, oh, I get a better sense now of that oversight role and what that means. Excuse me. So a good way to do sort of a check-in around, are we doing what we should be doing as a board to make sure that we're fulfilling our responsibilities that we should be doing, is our, what we call our board self-assessment. And it's an online assessment tool that is free to all of our members. And we encourage the whole board to take it. And then once individuals do that, we provide the board with a report. This graph on the bottom of this slide is just one of the pages that shows you where people rated different questions within each of the categories you see there. Again, all based on that work, that Iowa Lighthouse research study about what highly effective boards spend their time on. So it's a great check-in point on an annual basis. Everyone else in the district is evaluated on an annual basis, mostly because it's required. but because it's also a best practice. So the board can take on that best practice for themselves, even though it's not a requirement. And so we're here certainly to support your work in that area. So I'm going to shift now to the governance standards and just go over briefly what that document is. So what this really talks about here, so, we've talked about what our roles and responsibilities are, but now how do we do that work? How do we actually carry that out? How do we as individuals bring what some might call our best selves to the board table? And how do we work together at the very highest levels to make sure that we're serving our students and communities? So back in 2017, MASB launched the Board of Education Standards. It's not something that we as a staff developed. It's not an organizational document. These standards came from board members like yourselves around the state who were put together to take a look at a lot of the research and a lot of the things we know about what makes a difference. But they came together and they worked to build these guiding principles and standards, really, again, to be reflective of that research. But they're meant to provide, I guess, what I would call a shared framework for effective school board governance, to really help boards raise the bar and to live up to the expectations of government officials or elected officials, I guess. So it's kind of our hope that the standards would help clarify the role, again, and board member to board member, the board to superintendent, the public to the board, those who are even considering to run for a board seat, right? What is it that this work looks like? It would also establish some expectations around, how do we behave? And really allows for those folks who are doing the work to really determine what the standards would be. And that it would really create a mechanism for leadership that really informs everybody about what we value and what informs our service, and potentially even sharing it out with individuals who might not have been paying much attention around what the work of a board is, and that it would be a framework for improvement. Right, and that it would allow each of us independently or individually, as well as our board as a whole, to do that reflection around how are we doing as we look at ourselves in relation to these standards that have been identified, and then have the good, deep conversations around how could we improve. So let's just take a look at how this breaks down. So when we developed it, we made sure that one of the criteria was that it was intentionally concise, short and to the point. We don't have a lot of time. Let's get right to it. That it's written in plain language. So often much of our work is in education speak, not this document. And that it would also provide common definition of terms, because so often we know that one word might mean something to me and might mean something different to someone else. And so it was important to provide those in there as well. The standards were broken apart as detailed here on the screen. In addition to the principles and standards, we felt it was important, again, to provide that glossary for you. So again, you can see here now that it's broken apart in two different main groups. What are the guiding principles and standards for a full Board of Education team? And then what are some standards for myself as an individual that I can really take on and reflect around my individual practices to determine how I can improve? So let's just take a look at the standards first for the board as a whole. So the principles here, the group felt strongly about: accountability, a commitment to learning, inclusivity, the role of stewardship, being transparent, and then being vision driven. So those are the principles. Now let's walk through the standards. And for the first standard, I'm actually going to show you some of the questions to have that reflection opportunity, that rich discussion around what does this mean for us? So for instance, in standard 1, the Board of Education, in cooperation with the superintendent and stakeholders, establishes and commits to a vision for the school district that emphasizes high expectations for achievement of all students and quality instruction. Wow, there's a lot in there, right? Where do you start? Well, right here's a set of questions. And you'll see there's quite a few of them. So the first one: has the Board of Education formally adopted a district plan that includes a concise vision statement? Good conversation around that. Some of your districts, you've stepped into a board role where a strategic plan and a vision are both in place. Others, that may not be the case. And so having that conversation, is now the right time to make sure that's there? Do we need to do some work before we get to that point? But a good question starter. The next question: were stakeholders involved if you have a process in place? So you can see how these questions here on the slide really start to help you dig deeper into the topic of this particular standard, and hopefully help you set the stage to make some decisions about how the board wants to move forward together as a team, again, including the superintendent in this discussion and decision-making process, and really just helping reflect on what have we done, what could we do, and what could we do better, right? So if we look at standard 2, again, I've not put the questions here, but Larissa's going to give you a link to this entire document, so you'll have not only the standards but the questions, to peruse through at a later date. So the second one for the whole board is that they govern in a manner that is dignified and worthy of trust, making sure that the community can be confident in those leaders making decisions for the students in the community. Number 3, the Board of Education is accountable to the school district community. And again, a whole set of questions around what does that look like in our district? How does it play out here where the culture might be something different than a different district next door to us or across the state? And the fourth one being, the Board of Education holds the superintendent accountable for creating the outcomes identified in the school district plan. Now, some of you may already know that there's a component in the superintendent evaluation process that requires that you evaluate the superintendent on progress towards those district-wide goals, or the district plan would be considered the same thing. But again, having good conversation about what that looks like in our district for our team. Great opportunity to spend some good time having some dialogue. So those are the standards for the board as a whole. And then I mentioned those individual standards. So let's start with those principles. So here, again, you're the one who's looking at yourself, reflecting your own behaviors here. Advocacy, inquiry, civility, integrity, courage, regard for authority of the board, empathy, and selflessness. All key principles around board service as an individual. So the first standard here, the individual school board member is motivated by and focuses on what is in the best interest of all students. Okay, now I didn't put together the questions here for you, but again, you have you'll have the opportunity to look at those in the document. The second one, the individual school board member believes in the importance of and actively engages in lifelong learning. I feel passionate about this one. up until the very last day of my 15 years, I continued to learn about things that would help me be a better board member. Some of that learning was individual, and some of that learning was as a team. It's a great balance. It's a great opportunity because none of us come to this work with everything we need to know. Things are constantly changing, and there are topics that we might not be familiar with in our day-to-day lives. So really engaging in that learning process is critical for your success. And the fact that you're here today, obviously you believe in at least the first steps of that. All right. Standard 3, the individual school board member understands and respects both the authority and responsibilities of the Board of Education. That's a strong one. And then last but not least, the individual school board member approaches school governance work with a spirit of inquiry, always open to learning and knowing that you don't have all the answers alone, right? So we've packed a lot of content, I think, into a short period of time, trying to give you probably just enough to be dangerous, as I like to say. Really hoping that we give you enough to intrigue you into learning more and having those good conversations, both in your district as well as with colleagues from other districts. It really is sort of one piece of your learning puzzle. And hopefully you'll continue to add those puzzle pieces throughout your board service. So you've heard enough from me. I'm going to ask Larissa and Cindy if they have any questions already in the chat. And by all means, if you haven't typed one in yet, but you have one, put it in there now. And let's make sure that we get your questions answered. And I'm going to stop sharing.
So Debbie, okay. I have a question. Could we be provided links to publications from the research done out of Iowa? And are there other comprehensive studies that have been done since, or replications or evaluations of the Iowa research?
So the Iowa Lighthouse Research Study information is out there on the web. You can just type it into Google and you will be able to find a lot of different pieces of information about that. Unfortunately, there is no other study except for the follow-up study that they did again I think it was in 2011 when they did the second one, where they kind of went back and did sort of a double check. Like, okay, we did this study 10 years ago-ish. Is it still holding true? Has something changed that makes the findings not what they need to be moving forward? And what they found was that the findings were consistent even after all that time. But unfortunately, no one else has taken on that work. So that's really the only one that we have to go by. But if you can't find information, we'd be happy to share some of that with you.
Next question. What are recommended best practices for the board to seek comprehensive input and build strong relationships with the community?
Yeah, so I think I'm going to talk in terms of putting structures in place, right? So it's not about, oh, I am an individual board member and I'm going to host coffees, because that doesn't serve the whole board or the whole governance team well. What it looks like instead is asking the superintendent, what kind of methods are we using to put information out to the community? Are we making sure we're hitting all of our different segments of our community? And when I say community, I mean staff as well, and families. But what are our mechanisms and our frequencies that we're using to put information out? And then asking the same question about how do we get feedback around programming and concerns? What are the structures we've put in place? Do we do regular surveys? Do we do a strategic plan? where we involve and ask the community for input? Are there opportunities for engagement, whether they're district-wide committees or some sort of opportunity at various buildings, right? So again, think in terms of the questions for a board member would be around the structures that might be in place and how are those structures working for us, right? Versus those individual activities.
Thank you. What one piece of advice would you give new board members? I love this one. Where are you going to go?
I'm going to give you two. I can't do it to just one. The first one, and this will serve you well over time. Figure out how to share with your community what your role really is. I'm going to say develop your elevator speech. And that might sound trite to some of you, but really what I'm talking about is a short response when someone talks to you and thinks you're doing the ground level work and you say, oh, you know, it's really interesting. Here's what a board member really does, right? So you're explaining to the community member what your role is in the district. That's the first one. The second one is sort of another elevator speech. And I think I saw something about this come across about complaints. And that speech is around explaining to your community members how they get their concerns best addressed, right? So if it's a concern that a parent brings you or a staff member, making sure that you understand the processes that are in place so that you send them in the best direction possible to get their concerns addressed at the closest level possible to the problem or challenge, right? Because otherwise, people are going to inundate you trying to have you solve all their problems, and you will know what your role and responsibility is, but they won't. And they also won't know where to go to get it addressed. And they might be hesitant about doing that, but because they know you, they're going to come to you saying, hey, can you help me with this? Yes, I can help you. Here's the direction you need to go. And that's really a decision about how to handle complaints that your governance team should make together, understanding what might be what some people would call a chain of command. Where do they go to get their concerns addressed? So those are the two quickest things. And the third, maybe there's three. Again, open yourself up to the learning. Take advantage of all of the opportunities that either MASB provides to you or your district provides to you, or that combination. Because there's just so much to know about this work, and it's so important that you understand, you know, all of the various topics to the best of your ability.
You always amaze me. Great answer. Here's a good one. Should the board be a part of the hiring process for school staff?
This is an easy one. The answer is no. Again, take a look at those words on that slide around hiring, around staffing decisions. And what I want you to think about is in terms of you hire one employee and that's your superintendent, and you evaluate that superintendent around all of the day-to-day management issues. If you're involved in staff hiring, you're saying that you know exactly what needs to be looked for, right? That you know, honestly, when I was a board member, I didn't know what a kindergarten teacher needed. What role would I play in that hiring process? Because I'm not an expert in what we're looking for. Your questions around staff hiring, again, to the superintendent should be, do we have a process in place we use for hiring? Is the process working for us? If it's not working for us, what are you doing to make changes so that it better suits the needs, right? So that's your involvement in staff hiring. making sure processes are in place, making sure resources are in place, whether we're talking about salary packages and benefits, time on task, all those sorts of things. Again, all structural issues, right? Not actually being a part of the hiring process.
Great answer. All right, I'm going to say to Jessica that we're going to punch your question to our legal department later on this afternoon. I'm going to go to Vanessa's. If your board has 5 new members that just started, when is the best timeline to do a board self-assessment?
I would say probably no sooner than 6 months in. But what I would say is it would be a good idea to have a board work session early so that you can start talking about how is this group going to become a team? How are we going to go about that work? Again, having some of those conversations around the roles and responsibilities and what are some structures we can put in place at our level for our governance team that would be helpful. Things like norms and board operating procedures. Those are conversations that need to take place early in the tenure of the team. And then as well as having conversations around superintendent evaluation, the tool and the process that you're going to use. So those should be done relatively early in this forming of a new team. And 5 is a lot of new team members. I can't tell you that it's going to be easy. It's going to take a lot of learning for this group because there's just not a lot of historical knowledge and there's not a lot of leadership capacity that's been built over time. Obviously, all of you are bringing components with you, but you haven't built them together over time. And so just be open to really the resources that might be available to you.
Attending district sports and activities can be overwhelming to the schedule. How much visibility should board members strive to achieve? How important is that?
Visibility is important. People need to know that you care about what's going on in the district. I think this is another one of those great topics for a governance team to really say what works. How big is our district? How many schools do we have and how many activities should each of us go to? In my particular district, we had board liaisons where we were assigned to buildings. And that meant that we certainly could go to any event we wanted throughout the district, but we made a commitment then to a particular building that we would attend a certain number of events and maybe, just be visible and at those things so that people could see that we did care. And then we rotated those each year so that other communities could get to know us. If our community is big, mine was relatively large, but there's a lot of different ways you can go about doing that so that it's not overwhelming and that you're also not only going to the same things you would do just because your children are at those activities. You have to expand your activity pool, if you will, and sort of stretch yourself to go in areas of the district that you might not normally go to, activity wise, so that you can get a good, well-rounded view of the district and then obviously the community of you.
Thank you again. Does a group work session include the superintendent and is it open to the public?
Yes and yes. We always encourage the superintendent to participate in work sessions. It's that governance team of 8 in most instances. I know the number's slightly different in a couple of specific districts, but it's through that conversation with your superintendent, again, bringing those different perspectives, theirs included, to the work that really gets you to a good place. And yes, they are open meetings. You have a full quorum of the board there. And so the public is invited. They don't participate. You do have to offer them the opportunity for public comment, but whoever is leading that work session, whether it's an outside facilitator like one of our members or in maybe an in-district leader, you don't have to allow those individuals in the audience to participate during your work session, just the public comment.
I think this one is part of one you've already answered as far as a branch off. Should the board be present or involved during teacher contract negotiations?
Yeah, so I will say there are a few districts still in the state that have board members on a negotiations team. And if that's your situation and it's working for you, we're not saying you can't do it, but we don't advise it. Again, you're putting one board member sort of in the midst of it, down in those weeds, if you will, seeing, how that sausage is made. And again, the board should be about setting criteria, right? Setting guideposts around here are the guideposts around negotiations. Now teams work together to figure out what those details look like. So we don't advise the individual board members to get into that work, no.
What do you recommend a board member should do if the superintendent does not share with the board pertinent information, and as a result, the community knows information that has not been shared with the board?
So this is where I was talking about those board operating procedures and coming together as a group of 8 to determine what those look like. And communication is probably the one I always encourage boards and superintendents to work on first. How are we going to communicate with each other? What are the methods, the frequency? How do we deal differently with routine, urgent, emergency? It's really sitting down and deciding what are the expectations of this governance team together, because what might have worked for the last governance team might look slightly different now for this new one, and might look different again in the future for yet another governance team. But it's having the conversation so that a superintendent understands how to meet the expectations of a board and not trying to meet expectations of 7 different individuals. So it's getting that conversation and then putting it in writing, formalizing it with a structure so that everybody's very clear about how we're going to go about the work.
How do you figure out if we need a larger sinking fund millage? We are being pressured to pass a higher millage because of the age of our buildings and roof costs that are expensive.
Yeah, so I'm not sure I have all the answers on that one for you. I think we're going to have a new board member webinar on facilities. Am I wrong, Larissa? There certainly is a CBA class around them.
Yeah, I don't think we have a specific webinar, but yeah, we have the CBA course.
Yeah. It's such a very district specific issue. I know many districts in the state have them. The district I was in included. It is a good way to transfer some of those types of costs out of your general fund so that you can divert more of those funds to the classroom and instruction. But again, the needs of each district and the taxable values, there's so much that goes into those decisions around how much to ask for and what are our needs, right? You have facility studies, all of those things that it's a bigger question than we can deal with here today.
Thank you. I think for anyone else, there's just a couple out there that we just need to follow up on, but I think that pretty much concludes the Q&A for you today, Debbie.
Hey. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I know you could have done all sorts of other things during your lunch hour today. I hope that you're going to continue to sign on to the new board member series. I hope you're finding them useful. Each one is, about a different topic. And again, just kind of enough to whet your appetite. Please know that we offer so many opportunities for your learning. This isn't in the script. I just thought I'd share with you because we have an unusual opportunity right now in that the legislature has given us a pot of money for your trainings. And so you can look on our website and see the ones that are reimbursable by the Michigan Department of Education. All of our 100 level classes, those are our basic classes, are fully reimbursable with the exception of our first one, which is a 6-hour class. But oh, there you go. There's the link. There are so many classes that are going to be reimbursable to your district. So take advantage of that learning. Your district will pay for the course and then be reimbursed. And so it's like a free opportunity for you to really get some good in-depth knowledge about some of the topics that you're all going to be expected to understand when items come to your board table. So by all means, I just want to say, take advantage of that pot of money the legislature put out there for us. It's the first time we've ever had it. So with that, I'm going to say, see you later, because I'm sure I'll see many of you at some of our upcoming classes and events. So thanks for joining us today. And thanks, ladies, for helping.
Yeah, and thanks for all the thank yous in the chat.